Yesterday we started to read this short essay. I think we will be able to finish within 3 or 4 days. Yesterday we stopped at this paragraph about the proportional of the flavor of freedom that we receive is proportional to the extent of our own practice. Practice a little Dharma, we reap little freedom. Practice a lot of Dharma, we reap abundant freedom. Today we are going to continue with the seemingly contradictory definition of freedom. Since the Dharma proposes to provide freedom as complete and perfect as any the modern world might envisage, a fundamental congruence appears to obtain between man's aspiration for expanding horizons of liberty and the possibilities he might realize through the practice of the Buddha's teaching. Nevertheless, despite this concordance of ends, when our contemporaries first encounter the Dharma, they often find themselves confronted at the outset by one particular feature which, clashing with their familiar modes of thought, strikes them intellectually as a contradiction and emotionally a stumbling block. This is the fact: while the Dharma purports to be a pathway to liberation, a teaching pervaded throughout by the taste of freedom, it yet requires from its followers the practice of a regimen that seems the very antithesis of freedom. A regimen built upon discipline, restraint, and self-control. On the one hand, we seek freedom, our contemporaries object, and on the other, we are told that to reach this freedom, our deeds, words, and thoughts must be curbed and controlled. What are we to make of this astonishing thesis the Buddha's teaching appears to advance? That to achieve freedom, freedom must be curtailed? Can freedom as an end really be achieved by means that involve the very denial of freedom? This is the paradox that we have to solve by reading this paragraph. Firstly, I think it's good to define a few difficult words here. Visage. Contemplate or conceive of as possibility or desirable future events. Yeah? Foresee, predict, forecast. So the first line starts with, the Dharma also proposed to provide a freedom which appears to be congruent with the modern definition of freedom. Yeah? The fight for liberty. Yeah? All these movements for freedom. Yeah? So there is a common theme of looking for freedom, both in the Dharma sense and also in the modern sense. But despite this common theme, despite this concordance, this agreement of the achieving freedom. Let's define concordance here. The first one is an alphabetical list of the words present in the text, but I think we will take the second definition, an agreement or consistency. Yeah, so both wants to achieve the same ends. What ends? Both wants to achieve freedom. When our contemporaries, okay, let's define contemporaries. A person or thing living or existing at the same time as another. Peer, fellow, compare, yeah. Basically, our friends who also seek freedom. Probably we encountered the same reaction as well when we explore Buddhism. Wow, why so many restrictions? First encounter the Dhamma, they often find themselves confronted at the outset by one particular feature, clashing, that feature clashing with their familiar modes of thought, striking them, not just them, probably some of us or all of us, intellectually as a contradiction, emotionally as a stumbling block. This is the fact that what the Dhamma purports, let's define purports. Purports, okay, that's how you spell it.
Purport.
Yeah. What the Dhamma purports appear to be or do something, or claim, profess. What the Dhamma claims, purports to be a pathway to freedom, to liberation. A teaching pervaded throughout by the taste of freedom. But the practice itself requires us to follow a regimen. Okay, let's define.
Regimen.
Yeah, a regimen, a system of government, or a prescribed course of medical treatment, diet, or exercise for the promotion or restoration of health. And basically, a prescription or training that seems contradictory to freedom, the antithesis. A person or thing that is the direct opposite of someone or something else. This one is more philosophical, the definition. The negation of the thesis as the second stage in the process of dialectical reasoning. Yeah, basically the opposite of freedom. A regimen built upon discipline, upon restraint, upon self-control. On one hand, we are seeking freedom. On the other hand, we're told to reach this freedom, our deeds, words, and thoughts must be curbed and controlled. What are we to make of this antithesis? How can we achieve freedom? By curtailing freedom. Can freedom, can liberation as an end really be achieved by means that involve the very denial of freedom? To find out, let's continue to read on. Okay. Sister Lin Toy, would you like to read?
The solution to this seeming paradox lies in the distinction between two kinds of freedom, between freedom as license and freedom as spiritual autonomy. Contemporary man, for the most part, identifies freedom with license. For him, freedom means the license to pursue undisturbed his impulses, passions, and whims. To be free, he believes, he must be at liberty to do whatever he wants, to say whatever he wants, and to think whatever he wants. Every restriction laid upon this license, he sees as an encroachment upon his freedom. Hence, a practical regimen calling for restraint of deed, word, and thought, for discipline and self-control, strikes him as a form of bondage. But the freedom spoken of in the Buddha's teaching is not the same as license. The freedom to which the Buddha points is spiritual freedom, an inward autonomy of the mind, which follows upon the destruction of the defilements, manifests itself in an emancipation from the mode of impulsive and compulsive patterns of behavior, and culminates in final deliverance from samsara, the round of repeated birth and death.
Thanks, Sister Lintai. We start by distinguishing between the two kinds of freedom. Freedom as license and freedom as spiritual autonomy. Firstly, let's define license here. License. The first definition, grant a license to authorize the use, performance, or release of something. Permission, authorization, permit to do something. Okay. This one as a verb. License here means a permit from an authority to own or use something, do a particular thing, or carry on a trade. The second definition probably fits this paragraph more. Freedom to behave as one wishes, especially in a way which results in excessive or unacceptable behavior. This is the modern definition of freedom as contrast with the freedom as spiritual autonomy. Contemporary man, probably some of us even, probably before we start to explore Buddhism, identifies freedom with license to do whatever we, the ability to do whatever we want to do. That's why it's called license. Gives us the permission, the authority to pursue our impulses, our passions, our whims. To be free, he believes, or we believe, we must be at liberty to do whatever we want, to say whatever we want, and to think whatever we want. Every restriction laid upon this license, we see as an encroachment upon our freedom. Let's define encroachment. Intrusion on a person's territory, rights, a gradual advance beyond usual or acceptable limits. It's like a breach of our freedom. So a practical regimen, like the Buddha's teachings, calling for restraint of deed, word, and thought, for discipline and self-control, strikes us as a form of bondage. However, the freedom spoken on in the Buddha's teaching is not the same. The freedom to which the Buddha points is spiritual freedom. An inward autonomy of the mind which follows upon the destruction of the defilements manifests itself in an emancipation from the mode of impulsive and compulsive patterns of behavior, and culminates in final deliverance from samsara, the round of repeated birth and death. Okay, let's read probably one or two more paragraphs about Sister Billy. Would you like to read?
Thank you. In contrast to license, spiritual freedom cannot be acquired by external means. It can only be attained inwardly through a course of training requiring the renunciation of passion and impulse in the interest of a higher end. The spiritual autonomy that emerges from this struggle is the ultimate triumph over all confinement and self-limitation. But the victory can never be achieved without conforming to the requirements of the contest, requirements that include restraint, control, discipline, and, as the final prize, the surrender of self-assertive desire.
Okay, thanks, Sister Billy.
Thank you.
Okay, so far we have established, firstly, the seemingly paradoxical freedom defined by the current context and the Buddha's teachings. And we have laid down a few groundwork and definitions. The distinction between the freedom as license and the freedom as spiritual autonomy. Spiritual freedom, here the text says, cannot be acquired by external means. It can only be attained inwardly through a course of training requiring the renunciation of passion and impulse in the interest of a higher end. The freedom that emerges from this struggle, the spiritual autonomy, is the ultimate triumph over all confinement and self-limitation. But the victory can never be achieved without conforming to the requirements of the contest. What are the requirements? The requirements that include restraint, control, discipline, and as the final prize, the surrender of self-assertive desire. Tomorrow, we are going to explore further with a hypothetical example, but a very illustrative one. 燕消三障就犯了，燕的最后一证明了，虎燕追障细消除，却是上行菩萨道。阿弥陀佛。Till we meet again, may we be guided by the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a licensed Thursday ahead. Thanks everyone for participating. See you guys next time.
Okay. License to do what?
License to practice the Dhamma.
Yeah, license to be happy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.